Okay, now we're going to talk about the 45, 45, 90 triangle. So if we have a square and the sides are both 2, we know that the angles of a square are all 90 degrees. So if we cut that square diagonally, we get 2 45-degree angles. And this is called an isosceles right triangle, if I could spell that. You should remember that from your Delta Math days. Okay, so these two sides are both 2. How do we find the hypotenuse? So you did that on your little special right triangles worksheet thing. So in this case, we would get the square root of 8, and we can simplify that to 2 root 2. And hopefully you noticed a pattern as you did that. So let's get rid of this guy. So like I've got the 2 short sides of my right triangle, and then I've got the hypotenuse. And in this case we had 2, 2, and then 2 root 2. If it was 5 and 5, we would do 5 squared plus 5 squared equals c squared. And then that would give us the square root of 50. And then if we split that up, we would get 5, 5, and 2. And so that would be 5 root 2. And you should have noticed a pattern as you did this 5 times. So that pattern would be whatever my short leg is the same for both. And then the hypotenuse is that number times the square root of 2. And that's going to be the same for all 45-degree, 45-degree, 90-degree triangles, or isosceles right triangles. I'll call them 45, 45, 90 most frequently. Okay, so let's look at this pattern. So we said that if our short leg is x, our other short leg will be the same. And then the hypotenuse will be that number times the square root of 2. So this is a leg, this is a leg, and this is the hypotenuse. Okay, so if A is 8, B will also be 8. And then if we did the Pythagorean theorem and reduced our radical, we would get 8 root 2 for our hypotenuse. Okay, so whatever the short leg is, it's the same for the other short leg. And then the hypotenuse is just that number times the square root of 2. So 7, 7, 7 times the square root of 2. 4, 4, 4 times the square root of 2. Okay? If we're given B, if we're given the second leg, well, the first leg is still going to be the same. I want to use a different color. The second leg is still going to be the same as the first leg. So both of these legs would be 7 root 2 and 7 root 2. And then if I know this number and I want to figure out what this number is, I'm still going to multiply this times the square root of 2. So 7 square root of 2 times the square root of 2. My square root of 2's can multiply. So that would be 7. What is the square root of 2 times 2? Square root of 2 times 2 is just a normal 2. So this is like a 7 times a normal 2. So that would give me 14 in that case. So just to emphasize, whatever my leg is, the other leg's going to be exactly the same. And the hypotenuse is going to be that leg times the square root of 2. Okay, that leg times the square root of 2. And whenever you have a radical times another radical, you can multiply those. If you have a number not inside the radical, it's just going to stay where it is. So if I leave the 7 where it is, and I multiply the square root of 2 times the square root of 2, I would get, another way to think about it is I would get the square root of 4 and you should know that the square root of 4 is 2. So that means the 7 that's still there is multiplied by 2. Another way to think about it is the way we think about simplifying radicals. I have 2 and 2 both inside the radical. So the square root of a number times itself is just that number. Okay, so let's look at the square root of 3. If one of my legs is square root of 3, the other leg will also be the square root of 3. And the hypotenuse is going to be the leg times the square root of 2. It's always the leg times the square root of 2. Leg times square root of 2. Leg times square root of 2. Leg times square root of 2, right? So in this case, I have square root of 3 times the square root of 2. That's the same thing as saying the square root of 3 times 2, which is just the square root of 6, and that can't be simplified. All right, if I have 5 root 7, then that leg is going to be the same, 5 root 7. And then the hypotenuse is going to be 5 root 7 times root 2. And that's the same thing as saying it's 5 times the square root of 7 times 2. So we can't simplify the 7 and the 2 inside the radical, so we're just going to leave it 7 times 2, which is 14. Now this last section it's a little different. So if I'm given C, I know that C is x root 2. And if I'm given A, I can get C by multiplying by the square root of 2. So if I want to go the other way around, I need to divide by the square root of 2. So if I have 6, I would need to divide by the square root of 2 to get x. Okay? And now yesterday we talked about how if I have a radical in the denominator, that's considered improper. And so to change that, we would multiply that radical times itself, because the square root of 2 times square root of 2 times 2 is just 2, right? Whenever you have the square root of a radical times itself, it's just that number, because that's what square root is saying, what number times itself. And then whatever we do to the bottom, we have to also do to the top. So we need to multiply the 6 times the square root of 2 also. And we just write that 6 root 2. We can reduce the 6 on top and the 2 on the bottom to 3 over 1, which we don't need to write the over 1. But that would give us 3 root 2 for our short leg. And then our other short leg is exactly the same. So if you notice, we ended up taking half of our hypotenuse. So from 6 we went to 3, and then we also multiplied by the square root of 2. So half and then times the square root of 2. So for 14, it should give us 7 times the square root of 2. And you may want to pause the video and do the whole process yourself. You would say 14 equals x root 2, because that's what C is. And then divide by root 2, and then you would go through this process here. Okay, if our hypotenuse is 30, we would get 15 root 2. And then if our hypotenuse is 21, that's going to give us either a fraction or a decimal. So you may see it written 10.5 root 2, or you may see it written 21 root 2 over, I can't write here, over 2. Hang on. There we go. Root 2 over 2, or 10.5 root 2. You'll see it both ways. Okay, remember, if you have questions, feel free to ask them in the comment section, or we can talk about it a little bit on Monday. But I hope you took notes on your handout or on your own notes paper.